On the surface, Hinckley was the poster child for the American privileged life, but that dream life quickly turned into a nightmare as he once tried to murder a president because of an obsession he interpreted as love. John Hinckley Jr. was born on May 29, 1955, in Ardmore, Oklahoma, into a family that, on the surface, embodied stability, affluence, and respectability. His father, John Hinckley Sr., was a successful oil executive who later became president of Vanderbilt Energy Corporation. His mother, Jo Ann Hinckley, was a homemaker. The family lived a comfortable upper-middle-class life, eventually settling in Evergreen, Colorado, a suburban community near Denver. Nothing about Hinckley's early childhood suggested the trajectory his life would later take. He was not abused, neglected, or exposed to extreme instability. Teachers described him as quiet, shy, and withdrawn rather than disruptive or violent. From an early age, however, Hinckley struggled socially. He found it difficult to form friendships, rarely dated, and felt overshadowed by his older brother, Scott, who was more conventionally successful and socially confident. By adolescence, Hinckley had begun to retreat inward. He developed an intense sense of inadequacy, particularly around masculinity, success, and recognition. These feelings would later grow into something far more dangerous, but at the time they appeared as little more than depression and social isolation. In the 1970s, Hinckley moved to Los Angeles to pursue his dreams of becoming a songwriter. This period proved pivotal. Los Angeles represented everything he longed for: fame, validation, and a chance to reinvent himself. Instead, it became a furnace for his delusions. Hinckley failed repeatedly as a musician. He lacked discipline, struggled with motivation, and received little encouragement. Rejection compounded his already fragile self-esteem. He drifted between short-term living arrangements, relying financially on his parents, which deepened his feelings of emasculation and failure. During this time, Hinckley became increasingly obsessed with celebrities, particularly those who symbolized youth, beauty, and recognition. He followed famous people, collected memorabilia, and imagined himself becoming significant through association with fame rather than achievement. This was not simply admiration. It was identity substitution. Hinckley did not merely want success. He wanted to become someone else in the public imagination. In 1976, Hinckley watched the film Taxi Driver, directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Robert De Niro. The movie tells the story of Travis Bickle, a socially alienated man whose descent into violence is framed as both disturbing and tragic. He identified deeply with Bickle's loneliness, resentment, and desire to make a grand gesture that would force the world to notice him. He watched the movie repeatedly, somewhere around 15 times. He memorized dialogue and modeled aspects of his behavior on the character, Bickle. He began dressing and acting like Bickle. He even started drinking the same wine as his hero. Most importantly, the film introduced him to Jodie Foster, who played a young sex worker in the movie. Hinckley's fixation on Foster escalated rapidly. He interpreted her role not as fiction, but as a personal connection. In his mind, she represented purity, vulnerability, and transcendence. Someone who could redeem his meaningless existence if only she would recognize him. Mind you, she was only 13 at that time. By the late 1970s, Hinckley's interest in Foster had transformed into a full-blown obsessional attachment. When he discovered that young Miss Foster studied at Yale University, Hinckley followed her to New Haven, Connecticut, where the school is located. He loitered near her dormitory from time to time, slipped notes under her door, and made repeated phone calls which totally had Miss Foster worried. The notes ranged from awkward expressions of admiration to increasingly majestic declarations of destiny. Foster did not respond. This rejection did not deter Hinckley. Instead, it intensified his belief that he needed to do something extraordinary to prove himself worthy. In the film, Travis Bickle tries to save a child prostitute, played by a 12-year-old Jodie Foster, by assassinating a political figure. John decided that to win Jodie's love in real life, he had to complete the mission from movie. In Hinckley's mind, violence became a form of courtship. He decided that the political figure he wanted to attack would be a president, so he could really make a statement. He had a whole shrine dedicated to her everywhere he went, even in the hotel rooms where he stayed while stalking Miss Jodie. This contained fast food wrappers, newspapers with headlines circled in red, and photos of Jodie Foster everywhere. Hinckley's fixation began to merge with political symbolism. He studied assassinations and famous attackers, not for ideology, but for infamy. He saw historical acts of violence as shortcuts to immortality. Most people don't know that Ronald Reagan wasn't his first choice. He stalked Jimmy Carter first. He would go around political rallies to see how close he could get to a president, and once discovered he could get within shooting range, he decided to set his plan into motion. It was a quite reckless plan, but John didn't care. Nothing was going to stop him. Jimmy Carter was Mr. Hinckley's main target, but he lost the election to Ronald Reagan around that same period of the stalkings. So he changed his focus to newly elected President Reagan, as he promised himself that he'd assassinate a high political figure. His plan entailed transporting 3 handguns in a bag from Nashville to New York. At the International Airport in Nashville, Hinckley placed his suitcase on the belt at the South Concourse checkpoint. As it passed through the X-ray, the screen did not just show clothes. It showed the unmistakable skeletal outlines of 3 handguns and a pair of handcuffs. He wasn't caught by a genius detective. He was caught by a standard airport screening because he was too disorganized, or perhaps too subconsciously desperate to be stopped to hide them better. He was arrested in Nashville on the 9th of October, 1980, with 3 handguns in his luggage while Carter was in town. But they let him go with a fine. The FBI and local police treat him as a gun enthusiast or a lonely drifter, not a high-level threat. They did not connect him to the president's visit. They did not notify the Secret Service. A judge set his bond at a measly $62.50, cheap change which almost had the president in a lift. Hinckley paid the fine up front and walked out of the jail that same night and disappeared into the Nashville darkness. He left his guns behind as they were confiscated, but he kept his freedom. Within 4 days of being released for carrying 3 guns, Hinckley flew to Dallas. He went into a pawn shop and simply bought more guns. This was not political hatred. Hinckley had no coherent ideology. Ronald Reagan was a symbol, not a target of belief. On March 30th, 1981, he wrote one last letter. He didn't mail it. He left it on the desk in his hotel room, knowing the police would find it. It read, "Jodie, I'm doing all of this for your sake. By sacrificing my freedom and possibly my life, I hope to change your mind about me." This letter is being written only an hour before I leave for the Hilton Hotel. Jodie Foster was already 18 at this point. Outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, Hinckley carried out his plan. He went into the crowd dressed as a simple young man. Then he pulled out a gun and fired several rounds at the president. The event unfolded in seconds, but its impact echoed for decades. President Ronald Reagan was wounded, as were 3 others. Hinckley was immediately subdued and taken into custody. Within hours, the nation was in shock. The attempted assassination of a sitting president reopened wounds left by the assassinations of political figures like John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. The country demanded answers. Not just how, but why. Hinckley's explanation stunned investigators. He claimed the attack was a love offering to Jodie Foster, intended to impress her and prove his worth. He expressed no remorse in conventional terms and showed little understanding of the suffering he caused. Psychiatric evaluations revealed a young man suffering from severe mental illness, including major depressive disorder, narcissistic personality traits, and psychosis. He was described as detached from reality, emotionally flat, and incapable of understanding the moral weight of his actions. His notebooks and letters laid bare a mind consumed by fantasy, grievance, and delusion. Hinckley's trial began in 1982 and became a national spectacle. The central question was not whether he committed the act. He clearly had, but whether he was legally responsible. His defense argued insanity, supported by extensive psychiatric testimonies. The prosecution emphasized premeditation and planning, arguing that Hinckley knew right from wrong. The jury deliberated for days. On June 21, 1982, Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The verdict ignited public outrage. Many Americans believed justice had failed. The idea that someone could attempt to assassinate the president and avoid prison horrified the public. Victims' families were devastated. The insanity defense itself came under intense scrutiny. The Hinckley verdict led directly to sweeping reforms in insanity defense laws across the United States. Many states shifted the burden of proof onto defendants or narrowed the definition of legal insanity. Congress passed legislation restricting the defense in federal courts. James Brady was a victim of the attack who was left critically injured. His injuries also changed the gun control movement. His wife, Sarah Brady, became a prominent advocate, and the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act was eventually signed into law in 1993. Hinckley's name became synonymous with systemic failure of mental health care, legal standards, and public safety. Hinckley spent decades confined to St. Elizabeth Hospital in Washington, D.C., a federal psychiatric facility. Over time, doctors reported gradual improvement. He received medication, therapy, and structured supervision. Beginning in the late 1990s, courts allowed limited, supervised visits with his family. These privileges expanded slowly over the years, and each step toward freedom was met with public resistance. In 2016, after more than 3 decades, a federal judge granted Hinckley conditional release to live with his mother in Virginia under strict supervision. By 2022, most restrictions were lifted. The decision reignited debate. Can someone who committed such an act ever be considered safe? Does recovery negate responsibility? Hinckley himself has attempted to reinvent his public image as an artist and musician with a nice, well-run page for himself. Good for him, I guess. A deeply controversial effort that has been met with widespread condemnation. As of 2026, Hinckley continues to release music on his YouTube channel and recently published his autobiography, Who I Really Am. While he stands for peace now, the shadow of 1981 remains, especially as we approach the 45th anniversary of that fateful day. Well, this is Static Solved. Be sure to like and subscribe to get President Ronald Reagan's point of view about this whole matter. Thank you for watching.